Okay, welcome everyone to another episode of Paths Uncovered, and essentially a podcast where I get to talk to people about their lives and I just get to be nosy and find out exactly how they got to where they did. I find that kind of stuff really interesting. It's also really motivating just hearing people's lives and how they've managed to pivot different things. And today we've got a fabulous guest for you. I've got Sally Grace with me and I'll let her do her own introductions. There's too much to cover for me.
Hi everyone, I'm Sally Grace. I'm a data scientist at a company called Whisper, which is based in Melbourne, Australia. So I train machine learning and AI models to help sort of improve their product features, but I come from a background which is a little bit different in that I was a neuroscientist up until pre-pandemic, so March 2020.
And it's actually really interesting. I mean, I had another guest on earlier on. She was a ballet dancer, like Juilliard trained ballet dancer. And then the pandemic hit and she's like, what do I do with my life? Like, what do I actually want to do? And she kind of pivoted into AI as well. I feel like lockdown really was that kind of time for a lot of people to make those little changes.
Yeah, definitely. There was actually a concept in academia that I came across in just by trawling Twitter through my PhD, and it's called an academic escape plan. And so I had always flirted with the idea of becoming a data scientist throughout my PhD, and that was always my academic escape plan. So you can look it up by, I think it's like actually a hashtag, and people discuss what their escape plan is from academia. So basically, once the pandemic hit, I decided to hit play on that escape plan.
I love it. It was ready to go. This is it. Oh God. I've got a friend who is literally doing a PhD as well. And she's been on the podcast. I think she was kind of talking about it. I mean, I've been trying to get her to move to Australia. I'm like, come here. Like, you can be a data scientist in no time. You're so much better than I am at my job. Like, I will get you here. Like, I think I kept joking about when I moved to Australia. I was like, I don't need to make new friends, really. I could just migrate all of them. This is perfect. It's Australia. Every Irish person wants to be here. It's ideal. But
yeah,
it hasn't happened yet.
I've heard you move in packs as well, like the Irish and the Scottish. It's like they tend to like move around in groups.
Yeah, we really do. And I need my group, so I'm okay with this. I'm just going to get everyone out here at this stage. But look, we'll dive straight in. Take us back to kind of high school times. What was kind of the decisions going through in picking a degree? And because you went to degree and you did a Bachelor's of Science. So what was happening around that time?
So in high school, I was really interested in biology. I was very passionate about it. Ever since as far back as I can remember, I was super interested in biology. And then I had good scores in it. And then also I started doing year 11 and 12 psychology, and I was super interested in that in my VCE. And so I decided to do a degree that married the two together. So I ended up doing or applying for a double degree in psychology and psychophysiology. So psychophysiology is like electrical sort of measurements of the brain, but the degree that actually at Swinburne University is called cognitive neuroscience now, I'm pretty sure. They changed it a couple of years ago. But it pretty much started off basically as biomed in the first year or two, and then in the last year of that sort of half of the degree then went into the brain and biology and psychiatry and neuroscience. But it was basically understanding the human body. I really, really loved it. That was my first preference I ended up getting it, and I was super, super stoked. And yeah, then basically I guess the next steps of it were how I ended up in the further stages of the degree. I decided to do an honours year. And I decided to do cognitive neuroscience instead of psychology
So I was gonna say, so what exactly is, like, I've heard this before, and I'm like, what is an honours year? Like, as in, how does that work? Because I think in Ireland, like, we had just a 4-year degree and that was your thing done and you've graduated. But I think it's a little bit different. So if you want to just explain that a little bit.
Yeah, so it's actually a really good question. So in Australia, you do a 3-year undergraduate degree, or 3 to 4 years, depending on how much course load you have and how you break up, how you do the subjects. But you then apply to do, it's almost like, I think over in sort of like Norway and the UK, it's almost like a mini master's Over there, I'm not sure what the equivalent is, but basically half of your degree is a thesis that you do, and the other half is by coursework that's specializing. So a psychology honours will get you into a master's program. Basically, it's a stepping stone into further education, generally speaking. It's pretty competitive to get into the degrees. I decided not to pursue psychology. I always, when I started my degree, I had envisioned myself working in a hospital or a clinical setting. And then in my third year of university, I volunteered in a psychiatric ward in a hospital. And I started university when I was 17, actually. So I was super young. I was only 20 years old. And I was volunteering in the psychiatric hospital. And I would take people who were allowed a day pass. I would take them to Macca's or I'd take them to the servo to get cigarettes or whatever it was that they wanted to get from the servo. So I would escort them, or I'd help them do arts and crafts and things like that. But I actually ended up finding it quite full on. And I was very aware of how young I was, and I didn't think I was ready to take on people's psyches as a job.
It seems so big and important, doesn't it? And like, I think even when we were talking about it, like, yeah, this is so cool to me. And I was just like, you did psychology in year 10? I'm like, wow. Like, it was just not even a subject that we could have done. So it's just really interesting that you've kind of always had that around.
That's super interesting that it's not an option over. I think like year 11 and 12 psychology is actually pretty common for people to do in Australia. It's really interesting. It just kind of covers off all the basic concepts of like fight or flight, the stress response, kind of all the fundamental sort of, I think, like cognitive biases and things like that we have. So it's actually super interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I'd nearly kind of go back and just like do a course and like, and especially I say this kind of coming in from the point of view of data, right? Like, it's so important knowing these specific things to not make sure, like, to not have models that are doing incorrect things, like modeling based on biases and other things like that whole ethics branch of things. But I think a lot of it is dependent on exactly how people react and things like it's. Yeah, sorry, it was a very big tangent here, but it's just like really interesting that it's kind of always been such a big part, and how important. I mean. And then it does play back into the age, right? You're like, I'm only 20, and like, how am I really responsible for this?
Yeah, and I mean, that's not to say that I would have people's psyches in my hands at the age of 20 years old. Like, to actually go on and become a clinical psychologist is another, like 2 years of coursework and then 2 years of supervised placement. And then that's provided that you get in. It's highly competitive. But yeah, I decided to I really, really, really loved the biology side of things, the cognitive neuroscience. I decided I wanted to do brain imaging specifically. So I just went around and basically contacted all the potential supervisors for an honours project. That's how you go about it, because like I said, it's like almost like a mini master's to do a thesis. So I decided to just go around and contact any supervisors at Swinburne University who had a neuroimaging component to their projects. And I ended up getting in contact with this professor, Susan Russell, and she's still a really great friend of mine. We're still very close and talk semi-frequently, not as frequently as I would like, actually. Life just gets busy. But she had this imaging data set using the fMRI that's at Swinburne University of people with body dysmorphic disorder. And so what they'd done, it's a clinical psychiatric illness where people tend to perceive themselves as different to what they are and get highly distressed by it. And so she had that data set and she needed someone to analyze the data. And I was like, yeah, this is it. This is my chance to get my hands dirty with some neuroimaging analysis. Up until this point, actually, it's really interesting because I had never been a very sort of technical person. I was good at maths, but I'd never really saw myself as being like a computer nerd or, that like archetype. I'd always done like gaming in high school and, had the HTML MySpace thing. That's like about my like soiree with coding up until that point. Yep. I was always a lot more into sort of verbal learning and biology. I didn't really understand at the time what I was getting myself in for diving into neuroimaging. But yeah, so I ended up getting into that program, the Cognitive Neuroscience Honours, and doing the project with Susan. and I absolutely loved it. It was like everything just clicked into place for me. Like the statistics, I didn't enjoy statistics in undergraduate university, to be completely honest with you. Just the way that it's taught and SPSS and
I mean, I absolutely hate it. And I say this
you're
as someone who
triggered.
did a degree in statistics. Like it was, I mean, it's a financial maths degree, which is just actuarial science, which is literally, I mean, predicting the mortality rates of people, which is all statistics, right? And I mean, it pained me, it really did.
Yeah,
I never just got it, like everyone else in
yeah,
my course seemed to. And I like that was
yeah,
the worst part, wasn't it? Where it was just like I'd see them, we're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. This is normal. This is Gaussian. Like all these like distribution. I'm like, what is it? What? Like no, this does not
yeah.
equate.
Feels, honestly. And then I guess once I had a project to apply the analysis to, and I understood the bigger picture, and I understood the hypothesis and the question that
Yeah.
I was testing, and I understood the outcomes that I wanted to measure. It just all fell into place, and just loved it, and statistics just clicked for me because, like I said, the honors year, half of it was coursework, and we had to do like statistics subjects. I had to do like clinical psychology assessment subjects because it was sort of cognitive neuroscience is almost like um, understanding sort of psychology and the brain. So it's almost like what I was personally interested in is how are our psychological processes born from biology, basically. So understanding the biology, what's going on inside the body and the mind that gives rise to how we think and feel and behave.
Oh.
And so yeah, so I was just like, this is the best. And then I made some really good friends in that year who are still really good friends to this day. And then I got offered to do a PhD with the same supervisor and just snapped it up. So I kind of just fell into it, really.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and then the PhD was in body dysmorphic disorder as well. But I did a clinical trial that I sort of set up and got ethics approval for and everything, where I administered a brain hormone called oxytocin to people with body dysmorphic disorder, and measured their brains on and off the oxytocin, and then looked at how the brain connected as a network and the activation of the brain on and off the oxytocin. The hypothesis was that it's meant to increase your emotion perception and decrease your anxiety, which is some issues that people with body dysmorphic disorder have in the literature, or like that I derived from the literature. So that was my hypothesis that I tested. But how I really ended up in tech is that
Wait, wait,
I
wait. No,
didn't.
sorry. You need to go back. I want to hear what the results were. Like, did it work?
Sorry.
No, no, no. It's more. I'm like, I'm just intrigued. I'm like, did the oxytocin stuff work? Like, what the
Yeah,
hypothesis? Like, how did that go?
yeah. So basically, what I found was there's different paths in the brain that visual information is sort of sent down to process sort of holistic information and then detailed spatial information. And I found that the detailed sort of information, which is in the temporal lobe, which is like along here, they were hyperactivating those pathways. But then on top of that, so that means that they've got a preference for detailed visual processing. So what I did was, I should circle back. What I did was I showed people with body dysmorphic disorder in an MRI scanner just pictures of emotional faces, and then looked at their brain activation. It's a very classic. They're called the Ekman faces. Anybody in psychology and neuroscience pretty much knows them. They're these really awful black and white old images of just standard people from like the 60s, I'm pretty sure. And they're actors, and they're shown they're acting emotional expressions, so like happy, sad, angry. But the really interesting thing is, if you show these emotional faces in this consistent way, in fMRI it's called a block design, it really super highly activates certain regions of the brain. And this has been really, really tried and tested in the literature for decades. So basically, or since MRI was around, basically, but those faces were used before then. But it reliably activates this region of the brain called the amygdala. So obviously it's activating your visual pathways because you're looking at visual images, but they're emotional faces. So they activate this part of the brain called the amygdala. And the amygdala, have you heard of it?
I remember from year 12 biology. So I know the term and I know it does something in my brain, but I've forgotten the functionalities of it.
Yeah. So the amygdala is this part of the brain. It's the size of an almond, actually, and it's right in the middle of your brain. You've got two of them, a left one and a right one. And it's part of what people often refer to as the mammalian brain. But it's in neuroscience, it's called the limbic system. And so the amygdala is almost like the emotion detector of the brain, and it's a part of the brain that's used to sort of gauge responses to sort of the salience of things in the environment. So if you see, say, and it has a huge role in the fear response as well. So if you see like a lion coming towards you back in the day, your amygdala will activate, and then it's going to cause this fight or flight response. But in people with psychiatric illnesses, so for anxiety, because they've got that fight or flight response constantly happening, they tend to have overactivation of the amygdala. So it's one of the parts of the brain that's often studied in a lot of psychiatric illnesses.
That is very cool. So I mean, so it was a case of like the whole study was around kind of just what parts were lighting up and where the how oxytocin was impacting how deeply they were flaring up, I guess. Is that the right term? I'm not even sure what I'm saying anymore.
So actually, the thing that's interesting about oxytocin is most of the receptors in the brain for oxytocin, like 80 to 90% of the receptors in your entire body are located within the amygdala. And so there's a lot of research which one of my supervisors in my PhD had done, and some other people in Germany who I've collaborated with, where if you give people oxytocin, it can change the way the amygdala responds to certain cues in the environment. So my supervisor had done a study in social anxiety. So you can give people with social anxiety oxytocin, and it'll bring the activation of the amygdala down to the level of a normal person, or a healthy, I shouldn't say normal, sorry, of a healthy control person that is free of psychiatric illness.
Oh, that was a very quick little foray into neuroscience and psychology, and I loved it. It's so cool. Yeah. It's just interesting, and I think it really is. I mean, it's always been an interest of mine, just kind of like how do people, like how it all works and stuff, right? The brain is just, oh my God, so much going on in there. But no, that was great. Sorry. I'll let you go back off the tangent. Like, I think you were about to be like, okay, so this is how I actually got into tech having done this. I'll let you get back onto the track.
No, it's totally fine. Like, it's super interesting. And the funny thing about the brain is the more you know, the less you know. And I think that is true of a lot of careers. And I'm finding that in tech as well. But it's just like you study it for years in undergrad, and then, you do a whole thesis, and then you realize like you only know this like tiny, tiny, tiny little element of how the brain works really. And there's just never enough that you can know. And that's what I love about that field of research.
No, it's very, I hate this word. Eloquently, look, I literally don't know which way it goes. Do you know when they say some words and you can't remember which is the right way of saying it, and I can never remember? It's like eloquently. Yes, that sounds right. Eloquently put. I don't know why I did this to myself. I could have just said that was really well put. That could have been that anyway. But it's a really good comparison because I started into tech, right, where zero technical stuff, right? I mean, I did the maths and I did the statistics, and we did SPSS and R and like little bits in here and there. So I knew how to use programming languages and I could understand them generically. I can read code and I can generically figure out what it means. But then like actually diving in and I'm like, oh, okay, this makes sense. And you start into it and you're like, oh, this is okay, better. The more you find out, you're like, no, this is an abyss of things and I can never know this. Like, especially with like things like machine learning, you're like, oh, what am I staring into? This is a spiral.
And the pace of the development of things, it's like you get off the tools for one day and then it's just already moved 20 years into the future.
You're like, when did we discover this? Like, when did we make this okay and normal to be doing? Like, I don't understand. Can we go back to the times where it was like 2 gigabytes of RAM is all we had? Like, I mean, how? Anyway, God, sorry, I was watching the whole NASA stuff at the moment. And like, how did we make this happen? But so
Honestly.
You're doing the PhD and you're doing the neuroimaging and a little bit more of the analyses and stuff, and you're kind of digging into that kind of data sciencey world. And you're creating that what did you call it? The academic escape plan? Is that what it was? So is this where that's kind of coming into play?
Yeah. So initially we used MATLAB, which is not the funnest sort of IDE or language to use. It's not the most intuitive in the world. So a lot of the stock standard or the best gold standard at that time, neuroimaging analysis tools, there's this one called SPM, and that was written by these really smart people in MATLAB. So basically I had to start to import the brain images. I had to start learning MATLAB. And then also, a lot of the time you're running the analysis on supercomputers, which are based, like I was using one in particular that's based at Monash University. So you've got to use some sort of like Unix scripting. And so I just sort of fallen into this world where I was starting to play around with coding just because I had to.
Yeah.
And then I was doing linear mixed effect models, and they are just pretty much impossible. Well, they're very hard to do in
I mean, I've never even
SPSS.
heard of this, so I'm just like, oh, okay, whole new world.
And so for my thesis, and it's funny the way that it happened, because there's actually this oxytocin researcher called Dan Quintana. He's based at the University of Oslo, but he did all these really cool these really cool videos on YouTube. He's got his own podcast actually about academia called Everything Hurts, but shout out to Dan. But he did all these really cool explainer videos on how to run analyses in R. And so I started using R and just fell in love with ggplot2 mainly. And just really, like, it just was intuitive and made sense, and I understood, because in SPSS it's like you're just pressing buttons and you don't really understand, whereas in R you're forced to have to understand how you're setting up your models, and the steps that you go through. And so through that I just started coding more and more and more, and so I just eventually was like, oh, I actually really enjoy this, and I never thought that I would be there. And then, I guess it's just sort of something that I started eventually using more and more and more, and doing online tutorials. And I had no formal training whatsoever. I still feel like such a noob to this day.
No, and I think there is a lot to be said, I think, for not having that formal education, just because it kind of just forces you to figure it. Like, you have to get it done, right? It's like, I need to get from X to Y, and I have to get this answer at the end of it. I'll get it. And then it's like, okay, I've gotten a solution working. This is definitely not how it is actually meant to be done. Now let me go back and, like, that's literally how I've learned how to code. Like, especially because, so yeah, I knew a little bit of R from college. Like, we did the regression and like the time series, like the basic kind of statistical stuff in it. And then I came and they're like, oh, actually in industry, R is nothing. We just use Python. I was like, what a joke. Okay, I'll do that. And then, I mean, like, the first was like, oh, and SQL, that's this thing here. And I'm like, you're saying jumbo to me. Like, what is that even? What are you saying? And they're like, oh, that's another language. And it's literally a case of like so I've now gotten to across like Python and Spark and Scala, like all these different, like Scala and PySpark and all these different languages. And I'm just like, and it literally is how it always happens, is like, okay, there's sample code someone else has created. This is what I need to do. I'll do it. I'm like, oh, this, and they're like, actually, this is a bit more optimized. I'm like, cool, I remember that now. But it just, I think, and I only say that it's a little bit more interesting, I think, because I compare it to, say, colleagues and stuff who did the degrees in computer science, and every one of them will say the exact same thing, right? They're like, oh my God, I've learned so much more in my actual job than I ever did in college, because nothing was actually applied. It was like, here's the basics, off you go. And I think it's so true, where college really just kind of teaches you how to learn more so than any actual information. So we're all in the same area really at the same time.
That's actually my favorite quote, that even at a PhD level, A PhD, I think, is not necessarily a degree in the content of what you're doing, but the main skills you get in a PhD is learning how to learn. It's like grit and pure determination. Like people who have a PhD, it's like just that you haven't given up, because
Yeah.
most people want to give up at several points, believe me. And then also project management is
Yeah.
another massive one. And something that my colleagues have noticed about a couple of there's another PhD at Whisper that was hired around the same time as me. He's a product analyst and his name's Brian. And one of the product managers was saying that we both have really good presentation skills, because in a PhD, you have to present your thesis to every man and his dog. So you just get over it.
Yeah.
You just
very
present
quickly.
and present. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, and this kind of goes back to, sorry, there's like, I'm like realizing having, oh, this is what going to be episode 11 of the podcast. And there's really strong recurring themes. And most of them kind of like networking is really, really important. Go find the people will make everything happen for you. But the other thing is the transferable skills, right? People have multiple different careers and are able to make those switches and pivots just because they can leverage these skills that they've learned in other things and be like, no, I got this. I don't have experience directly, but it's transferable. I've got it. It's fine. And it's really important. Like PhD is something that is so interesting in that sense of it's just so aligned to consulting. Like it's essentially very similar to the whole thing. Like you're really trying to sell someone on your solution. Like it just is what exactly that thing.
Well, I've been meaning to write a blog post on, and I've got the shell of it in a Google Doc, but basically on how the data science process to me is so similar to the research methodology process. You have a hypothesis, except in data science, it's a business question, right? Basically, that you need to answer, and then you have to go away and you have to sort of research the methods. So initially you look at the previous research, what like medium blogs are out there, you know, like what white papers are out there. You look on archive, it's like, what are the people doing to answer this same business question? Then you sort of formulate your methods of how you're going to do it, and then you do experiments, like you might use this model and the accuracy is this, and then you test it against this other model and the accuracy is this, and then you're comparing across them, and then you decide, then you write up your results, and then you have to present the results to the business and then get feedback. And it's very similar. Like I attack the same problems in the exact same way.
Yeah. I mean, that's actually a really good way of explaining exactly what a data science problem is and how people, like how it works. Because like a lot of people understand that in the first place, right? I mean, so many stakeholders and stuff, they're like, AI, just give it to us. Just implement AI with it. Like,
yeah.
I love that you're enthusiastic about it, but also not how it works.
Yeah. Also, I think that a lot of people, well, not a lot of people, I shouldn't say that, a general statement, but seems like some people get confused between AI and AGI. So that's artificial intelligence and artificial general intelligence. So when you actually get down into the nitty gritty of AI, it's really just pattern recognition and a lot of labeling. And there's that Cassie, the lead sort of data person at Google, and she's just like, what is AI and machine learning? And she's like, labeling all the things.
Like just telling the machine the answer is what AI is, essentially, at the end of the day.
Yeah. And then it's like, I guess a lot of it as well is like managing expectations. It's like, no, we don't have artificial general intelligence. It's just like, you know, we're limited.
It's very specific things that we can do. We'll make our lives easier, and that's about it. It's essentially what a human can do, but just at a much larger scale. They can compute.
Yeah, exactly.
That's kind of how I've put it down to. I'm like, I think it's becoming just a thing that you start having so many conversations with like different stakeholders and stuff, trying to explain it. And you're like, nope, AI is literally what you can do in your brain, just multiplied by 1,000, essentially. Like that's it. That's all we got for you.
Yeah.
But look, I feel like we're going to keep going on tangents here, and I'm just like, I'm kind of conscious of the time, so I won't take up. No. And I love the tangents on these things that happen because it's important. And I love it. It goes everywhere. But so you were in the PhD, you were finished the PhD. I'm not too sure exactly where you got to before you decided to hit the button, get out.
Yeah, okay. So I actually finished my PhD and then spent a year kind of. I went on three huge overseas trips. I did some lab visits. The best thing about academia is there's part of it is like you go to conferences around the world and you can go visit, say, a lab in Germany and go stay there for 3 months and learn what they're doing there. Or I visited Dan in Oslo and did a presentation there. And so I did that after the PhD because I just needed to kind of decompress for a year. I was still working part-time. And then I got a postdoc with one of my PhD supervisors at Australian Catholic University. So that a postdoc is just like a postdoctorate position. It's a research fellow position, just where you're basically doing what you were doing in your PhD, so doing research, but you're getting paid a lot more to do it. And you don't have to write up a thesis. So it's great.
The benefits of everything. It's the best part.
Yeah. And so I did that and I loved it. I loved my team. I loved everything about it. And that was just really like solidifying a lot of the skills. But actually so I come across the concept on Twitter of one thing I must say, the best thing for networking and just keeping up to date with all of these things is definitely like Twitter has been like the best thing for me. But I decided to start flirting with the idea of an academic escape plan. My ex at the time was big into tech and he was like, you need to get into machine learning and AI with your skills. And I was like, okay. At the time, I didn't really like understand what it was. I think I thought it was AGI as well, probably. This is years ago. And a friend of a friend was a data science recruiter. So I ended up going for a drink with him one afternoon and he was like, you need to upskill in this, you need to upskill in this, you need to upskill in this. Mainly he just said Python and SQL and then cloud. Start familiarizing yourself with the concept of cloud. So AWS and Google Cloud. And that was super, super like useful for me. So I would recommend anybody to do the same. And then I just started sort of upskilling and just started learning what all these different concepts were. I got a Medium subscription and just read like a ton of blogs. And then basically a year went by and I didn't do anything about it. I was just kind of still just gathering information, researching. And then unfortunately the pandemic hit and my university lost a fair bit of funding and a whole bunch of staff in my department got cut. We all got made redundant. A big, huge arm of us just got cut off. It was pretty brutal. Just walked in one day thinking, I'm going to be doing this for the next 3 years, had all these long-term plans. And then it was March last year and lost my job, which was pretty shocking. And so I got a redundancy payout and then I was like, okay, this is the universe telling me I need to execute my escape plan, pull the parachute, like get out now. Yeah. And so then it was very serendipitous actually. So, another thing that this recruiter, which I should mention, pre-pandemic times, was to go to meetups, was what the recruiter said was a really big one. And so I started going to our meetups and women in machine learning and AI and just lurking and just absorbing this tech knowledge or these tech words that I had no idea. It was such a foreign world to me. And my boss, Fiona Milne, was she runs the machine learning, women in machine learning and AI meetup group. And I thought she was really cool, so I just started following her. I really liked the way that she spoke and her sort of brand that she had to do with like, ethics and AI and everything like that. She seemed very approachable. So I was just on LinkedIn one day, just randomly, and I was literally in bed actually, and I'm just like laying in bed, like scrolling through social media. And she had posted a post saying that she was looking for an associate data scientist to come on with her brand new team and help build some cool models. And I was like, this is it. This is my opportunity. So I sent her a DM. I slid into her DMs and was like, hey, I like think that I'm this person that you're looking for. Like, I'm an academic who's looking to get into industry. I had no idea how. I was expecting to go on like a General Assembly boot camp. That was my plan for the next 6 months, sort of thing. And I ended up getting the job with Fiona.
I mean, so, I've got to hand it to your friend, the recruiter friend that you've got. Like, but like, those are literally the exact same things I would say in terms of like, I mean, people go like, well, how do I do it? I'm like, go to all the meetups, hit up the networking sites, and like do the upskilling, and it's exactly the same things. And it's literally, I mean, anyone looking for kind of that data science inspiration, this is it. And find the right people to follow. I mean, I absolutely adore Fiona. Yes. Like, she came on and did a session for us at Women in Code. And God, like, it's definitely one of like the best ones we had across the last year, I'd say. Like, it was such, absolutely love her. Everything you've said about her is very true.
Yeah. Yeah, so I was very lucky, and again, just kind of fell into it. Like, I wouldn't say I fell into it. That's probably actually underselling the work that I went through, and actually just kind of just being present, I think, was one thing, and just being curious, and yeah, I guess just following, like you said, following the right people, showing interest, and finding people, I think, that like align with your values and personality and interests is another really important thing. So yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I say this all the time where I'm like, I kind of fell into tech, and I followed that immediately with, I hate saying it, but that's what happened. But I mean, you literally spent a year preparing yourself to fall into it. Like, it's very different, right? I think it's like same thing. Like, I mean, I did a 4-year degree to kind of get myself into a position where I could fall into tech. Like, it didn't just happen to anybody.
Yeah.
There is work that goes into it, but I mean, yes, a little bit of it is that serendipitous moment of like, and it all lined up perfectly.
Yeah. Yeah. It was, but I feel like it was a really good move. I'm very happy. It's been really cool. We've now built a team. So when I started, it was myself, Fiona, and we have a database engineer, Kim, or a database administrator, and also an engineer. And then since then, we've got 2 data engineers, we've got a machine learning engineer. So we've got like the full sort of end-to-end sort of team going. So it's really awesome watching it grow. And we've been building a data lake, because the company that I work for is like been around since the .com age. So a lot of their systems have been around since the .com age. So it's that classic data science trope that you read on every blog. It's like 80% of the work is like actually getting the data cleaned and into your hands.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, it's really funny, like, whenever, I think almost every time I talk to any kind of person in data, really, we talk about these cliches and stuff, and we end up, it's not even we talk about cliches, we talk about scenarios where we're actually doing things that are cliched, because it's just so common. Like, that is exactly how it works, and that is the way data will, hopefully not forever, but is going to be how it works, because everything's kind of all over the place, and getting it all together is mainly the job half the time.
Yeah, definitely. Another thing that I really love about the machine learning and AI community is all of the memes. Like, myself and the machine learning engineer, just pretty much our Slack chat is like, there's like a little bit of work chat, and then it's just like us in any work related context. It's just like there's a meme for it. It's just the best. I
mean, I think so when I was at Purple before, we had like multiple different, like the data team was pretty active. Like, we caught up very regularly, and we made sure we were doing things. So I've just moved into a new company and a new role, and I was like, where are the data team? Where are the Teams channels? Where am I going to just call and just talk random stuff about? And there wasn't, well, I mean, there was like Teams channels and stuff that hadn't been talked in since 2018. And I was like, this ain't going to do. I was like, now I'm like, I've literally got a Teams channel going, and there's memes flowing in there. And I'm like, every week, I'm like, let's go, more of them. This is perfect. Yeah. Like, I mean, that is like the greatest parts of like data science teams and stuff. Like, you've got people who are interested in the same things, like generically, but all have like really different skill sets. Like you mentioned, your own team, like it's all end to end, right? So everyone has their own little viewpoints, and you kind of just join in, and it's like, this is it. This is what I wanted.
Yeah. And yeah, I like to envision us as like a sort of like a pipeline, or like a moving kind of, like you've got the database that's storing the data, and then you've got the data engineer that's like cleaning the data and getting it into the data scientist's hands, and then they get it and test and experiment with it and train models, and then they hand that over to the machine learning engineer, and then they do all these amazing things and put it into production, and then they have to interact with the people on the front end. This is in like a software company I work for, basically. So that obviously this is particular to my company, but it's really awesome to have the full process.
Yeah, and you learn so much more. Like, I mean, I say, like, you pick up all these little things, and you're like, oh, I actually randomly know all these different things now, just because I've been around these people long enough to hear them talk about it, which is very handy. I'm not gonna lie, like, it works itself out. Look, oh my god, I think we can go on for ages, but I'm so glad we got to talk, and I think it's really fun. And this is where, so basically, me and Sally kind of ended up getting in touch essentially because of a mutual friend who kind of listened to the podcast. Like, hey, I actually know someone that would be great. Here she is, chat. And I was like, yes, this saves me the hassle of like literally stalking people down and like messaging them like crazy people. I'm just like, hey, I think you're really cool. Please come talk to me, is essentially what my messages are at times. So I'm very glad that people, so I mean, hey, if you're a listener and you know someone who's got a really cool, different like career that most normal people, again, I said the normal thing, didn't I? The most usual, like the career paths that we've heard about, the traditional paths. If you've got or even if yourself, if you've got a really different one, please reach out. It makes my life so much easier. I want to hear from you. So I'm very glad, Sally, that you came on and chatted to us about everything from all the psychology stuff and the neuroscience and how it all works, all the way into machine learning. I love it. It's like everything I wanted to hear in one session.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been super fun, and thank you, Laura, for putting us in touch. Again, Laura was somebody who we are internet friends. Like, we only became friends through liking each other's posts on Twitter. So yeah.
I mean, I think that's literally how I know her as well. It's like we're all just Twitter friends at this stage. This is great. I'm gonna try and get her onto the podcast too. I'm just like, Laura, I think you're next. Let's go. Yeah, exactly. Oh, this is it. But look, we might leave it off there. Thank you so much for your time. Pats Uncovered will be back in 2 weeks with another episode. Maybe it'll be Laura. I have no idea who it'll be yet. I'm gonna go stalk some more people. But in the meantime, take care of yourselves, and we'll see you all soon.